Hi folks, my name is Christopher Dean, and the title of my part of this presentation is Digital Design and Advocacy in the Service of Creating Common Ground. So I'm going to, and this is the outline here, provide a little bit of context in terms of the course here. I'm going to give some theory, we'll take a look at a particular case study, talk a little bit more about theory and practice, and then finally open up and try to get at some questions. So what is the context? So the context is that we have two general education requirements for writing courses at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And Kathy told you about one, which was Writing 2, which is our first year GE course. It's a course that is pretty much everywhere nationally. What I'm going to share with you now is our 105 course and the 105 sequence. This is a junior rising or senior level course that students take in writing. Now the 105 classes, we have 105, 107s, 109s, and a course called Writing 50, a research course. They all have sort of different roles. So this is what a 105 class is. They encourage, quote, sophisticated analysis, in-depth reading, writing, and critical thinking awareness of how specific subjects of these classes can be situated across various disciplines. So this is really sort of writing across the disciplines or writing in the disciplines, and it's cross-disciplinary work that we tend to do in the 105 sequence. The particular course, and this course is now in its second year, it's a very new course that I and a colleague, Olivia Walling, have designed, and Kathy has actually taught, so she'll be able to fill you in even though I won't necessarily be here. So what 105 CW is its analysis and practice of various forms of community-based writing, such as reports and proposals by and for local groups that promote the social good. And the particular focus of the class that I, Olivia, and Kathy have taught is trying to work with and write about, with, for, and about issues of houselessness, issues of food insecurity, and working with a number of organizations in Santa Barbara and at the university itself that help folks facing issues of houselessness and issues of food insecurity in particular. In terms of what I'm talking about, there is an assignment that we do that is very much focused on students writing for place where they are working, where they're doing volunteer work, and they do 1 to 3 volunteer hours per week. And so what we're trying to do with this is it's called a navigator assignment, and it's a graphic work with supplemental analytic and reflective work that's done singly in a team, and it's an attempt to create a document that could be of use by members of the community. And often our community partners, I would say at least probably 60% of the time, are asking for particular things to be done. What you see at the right is from the student who I am going to talk about as a case study. This is her work. It's changed so to protect the anonymity of the participants where she worked and where she worked as well, but you can see it's essentially a very simple flyer for a meal share, and it looks pretty good, and I'll get at how it got to look that way. Now I want to try and ground this in activity theory, design theory, the literature around community writing, and genre theory. And so I'll get a little wonky here for a second, or at least a little theory wonky, but it's to a good end, I promise. So one of the sort of key concepts, sort of areas in which I'm working, is activity theory. And for the purposes here, it's the idea of a focus of writing being about human activity. And as Bazerman and Russell point out, text powerfully and pervasively mediates and remediates human activity. So activity theory tends to look at how, particularly in terms of writing, how writing is distributed across networks. And the network here is a network where students are working for local organizations to try and promote the social good and try and actively further the work that community organizations do working with folks who are unhoused or folks who are experiencing food insecurity. So at some point I plan to map this out in the way that activity theorists do, but you can see on the right-hand side this is sort of a proto-map of how this all relates. I think more significant is genre theory. Now, we tend to think of genre as sort of these containers with a set of rules, haikus or 575 syllabic poems. But that's not quite what it is. As Bawarshi and Reif point out, these are typified rhetorical ways of interacting with recurring situations. And so the genres that are created are socially constructed, and they work in particular contexts. So I think to try and understand the context, which is something obviously that in community writing is key to any sort of good outcomes, is really very important. So genre theory gets us to think about how do these genres arise, how do they mediate sort of the intellectual work of community-based writing. Now, the wild card in all of this is design theory, and this is something that is actively taught in Writing 105 CW, 105 Community Writing. So we use texts like the wonderful Non-Designer's Design book by Robin Williams, not the comic, but the wonderful designer. And I try to get students to understand basic concepts of design, things like the rule of thirds, the use of negative space, the golden ratio, and from Robin Williams' work, the acronym CRAP. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but I'll let you figure out what that spells out. But it stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And these, teaching students directly how to use these, providing them with examples, and getting them to work with the documents, document creation things like Canva, which I'll talk about in a minute, actually produce some pretty decent work, which I'll share with you in a second. So if we think about genre and activity theory, what does this bring to an understanding of community writing? So Deans writes about writing for, about, and with the community partners. And what genre and activity theory, I think, gives us is a more direct way to think about how social action does and should affect the text that our students produce. Also, I would argue that this theoretical construct helps us address, but certainly not eliminate, the tension we experience when our students move beyond the four walls of the classroom. It's always, as the literature and community engagement and service learning makes clear, a fraught move to help our students explore their connections to community members in ways that do not make firm distinctions about community members. So the way that it does this is by situating it within sort of social activities and social activity theory. I'll have more to say on that later. In terms of design theory, I think, simply asking that students sort of surf on their tacit knowledge of design is not enough for students to create useful materials for community partners. I think we tend to think that digital natives, as our students are often called, are better at computer-aided design than they are. However, simple readings, hands-on experience, and working things out and actually playing with programs, and I use the word play when I talk about this, help students not only see how, but why something should be done in terms of design. Design also inherently prioritizes audience's needs and the needs of clients. So design theory, I think, is very useful if we begin to think about how we want to prioritize the needs of our community partners. So a case study to sort of show you how this works. And as I said, on the right-hand side over here, you can see a document that was actually created in the course of this class. And along with this document, I asked that students do reflective work, standard practice in community writing. So one of the things that came up in the reflective writing is, while working on my Navigator, it helped me understand the organization's vision of a safe space for all students to be accepted and acknowledged. So this student worked at a meal share where undocumented students oftentimes came, and it was seen as an attempt to make a home away from home for these students. And that came across very clearly in the reflective work. The student was clearly aware of that, and that from her own writing stemmed from the work that you see to the right. I also interviewed her, and what's interesting about this interview was literally about a year after she had completed the work for the class, and she said a couple of things I thought that were really interesting. One is, quote, "Now I look at flyers people hand me and ask, why that font?" She is, I guess, as I would say, a little bit awake now in terms of aesthetic choices that are made. And she has actually continued to use what we use to design the document, which is called Canva. And she also mentioned that she learned about the worksite culture, which influenced her desire to do an ethnography for the final project. And in terms of the course, students create either an ethnography or a white paper about their work, drawing on their research that they've done in the field, but also on research that they've done outside through the library and online databases, and also through the reader of the class. So I think what this work allows students to do is to really think about the goals of the organization and try to align their effort with the goals of the organization. It helps them understand the location, the sort of socially situatedness in which they're operating. So what did she learn at the end of the day, and why is it significant? So she could think in design terms without much prompting. So, I mean, this is a year later, and she was talking about rule of thirds. I consider that a victory. I did my little sort of internal happy dance when Jocelyn said that. She really got ethics. She was still using the term houseless rather than homeless, because we had talked at some length about the stigma associated with that word. She mentioned food insecurity and other terms after a year of not actually being in the class. She also mentioned that she felt involved in the community and cared about her work, and that the work done for this and later for her ethnography was more significant to her than other work that she had done in terms of writing. Now, of course, one of the problems with service learning, particularly with ours, we're on a 10-week quarter system, is this is a quick experience. They're there for no more than 10 weeks, and most of my students haven't returned. A few have. But what's interesting is that she definitely is focused, I think, in really productive ways on issues and concerns. She was concerned about the ethics of her work. She was very clear about keeping things, keeping students' names confidential, and she understood that particularly for undocumented students, this was a key issue. So theoretically, practically, what can you take away? I can not recommend Canva strongly to you enough if you want to begin to explore how to use design to sort of, and the teaching of design, to help students really begin to understand sort of the situatedness in their location in terms of work that they do in a service learning course or a community writing course. And everything you see here, like this is for another meal share, was created using Canva. And Canva sort of allows students to draw on previous knowledge and then also on the knowledge of design that's taught in class. So I'm not by training or nature a design person, and as a matter of fact, I was one of those people who drew in stick figures long past the age when one should draw in stick figures. But I believe that I'm living proof that design is teachable, and students learn it pretty rapidly too. And Canva, because it's helping them make color choices and even font choices, actually helps with that. And really, I think one of the key things is this sort of work really foregrounds our partner's needs and goals in a direct way, and they're designing for the partner. I think it has helped our partners. I'm starting to do interviews with our community partners, but I think it does help the students more. And that's, again, one of those tensions I think that's inherent in the work of community writing and in service learning, and hopefully something we can talk about. So, sort of final little theory and practice takeaways. If we understand engaged community writing as participating in genres that are socially situated within discourse communities, we can begin to help our students understand audience in really ways, and it also makes goals of partners really sort of specific. I think it opens up research avenues for us to explore and networks of actors, students, community partners. And also it does a little something, I think, with the novice expert paradox. It makes it sort of less in the foreground, and students can move not to expert status, but to a level of design competence fairly rapidly using tools like Canva. Also, I think one of the things that students have continually mentioned in their interviews with me is that this was real work. This is not what Elizabeth Wardle calls mutt genres of the academy. They're actually creating documents that have a real life purpose. And I think that's one of the more sort of profound takeaways for the students, is that they want to do this work and they appreciate doing this work. Now, I have some questions for us, and hopefully will spark discussion. So, is there anything that's missing here in my work in terms of the theory? I'd love to hear about that, and I'm sure Kathy and Jim can tell me something. This is ongoing research. Is there anything that I should be doing? I'm doing interviews. I'm doing these sort of rhetorical readings of student work. This is a short presentation, but there's lots of material. Is there anything you want to see or hear more about? And again, I think Kathy and Jim can sort of fill you in. And anything else that occurs to you that you want to ask or talk about in terms of any of our presentations. I will eagerly await to hear what comes of this discussion. I just want to thank you for your time.